My mother waited until I'd served a perfect Thanksgiving dinner before she told me to get out of the house I paid for. Not the house I was raised in, but the house whose mortgage, taxes, and every single utility bill were paid directly from my bank account. The announcement came just as the scent of maple glazed turkey and cinnamon spiced apples reached its peak, a smell I had spent 2 days cultivating. By dawn the next morning, as she slept soundly in her bed, I had packed my entire life into my small SUV and driven away, leaving behind nothing but the cold leftovers of a feast she had so casually ruined. That holiday morning had started with a dangerous kind of optimism. The entire house was a carefully constructed illusion of domestic bliss. I had followed a celebrity chef's complicated recipe, brining the 16-pound turkey in a bath of salt water, cider, and herbs for 36 hours. The sweet potato casserole was a cloud of orange fluff topped with a crunchy layer of toasted pecans and brown sugar. The cranberry sauce wasn't a gelatinous cylinder from a can, it was a tart, ruby red concoction I'd simmered with fresh orange slices and a whisper of ginger. A from-scratch apple pie using my grandmother's cherished recipe was cooling on the kitchen counter, its lattice top a perfect burnished gold. The air was thick with the smells of rosemary, thyme, and my own desperate hope. I let myself believe for just a few hours that if I could orchestrate the perfect holiday meal, I could somehow paper over the deep, fractured foundations of our family. I foolishly thought that this time the food could say all the things we couldn't, and we could finally exist in a state of peace. I had set the dining room table with the good china, the kind you're only supposed to use for special occasions. I poured sparkling cider into delicate flutes and took my seat, consciously relaxing my shoulders for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I was determined to just be present, to avoid bracing for the inevitable criticism or the passive-aggressive jab that was my mother's conversational specialty. She, however, seemed to operate in a different reality. She sat at the head of the table with a detached, almost clinical air. She carved a slice of turkey with unnerving precision and chewed it slowly, her expression a complete blank. After a moment, she placed her fork on her plate with a soft, definitive click and looked directly at me. "This isn't working for me anymore, Sarah," she said. Her voice was flat, carrying the same emotional weight as if she were announcing we were out of paper towels. "I need my house back." My hand, holding a forkful of my painstakingly made stuffing, froze halfway to my mouth. The cheerful holiday playlist on the speaker, the sound of my sister Jessica's nervous cough, it all receded into a dull roar inside my head. I must have heard her wrong, but then I saw Jessica's eyes, wide with a familiar mixture of shock and fear, darting between me and our mother. My cousin Daniel, who had driven 6 hours to be with us, simply stopped chewing, a look of acute agony on his face. The silence that fell over the table was heavier and more suffocating than any of our past arguments. I slowly lowered my fork. My fingers felt like they were made of lead. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I pay the mortgage. It's my name on the loan. The payment is automatically drafted from my account on the 1st of every month. I pay the property tax, the water bill, the high-speed internet you use to watch your shows all day. I buy every single item of food in this house. You haven't worked in 4 years." She responded to this list of cold, hard facts with a tiny, dismissive shrug, as though the financial reality of our lives was a trivial annoyance. She lifted her glass of Chardonnay, took a delicate sip, and let her gaze drift to a point on the wall just over my shoulder. "I just need my own space," she murmured, addressing the floral wallpaper. "I need to feel like this is my home again." Her home! The phrase struck me with the force of a physical slap. In the story she had written for herself, I wasn't the daughter who had saved her from foreclosure. I was an inconvenience, an unwelcome squatter who had finally worn out her welcome. Let me give you the background. I'm a successful graphic designer. 4 years ago, my mother lost her longtime job as a hospital administrator when the company downsized. She was in her late 50s, and trying to find a comparable job at that age was a humiliating, fruitless endeavor. Her savings evaporated. Then, the threatening red-stamped letters from the bank started to arrive. I was living in a beautiful loft apartment downtown, building a life I loved, a life of independence and creativity, but I couldn't stand by and watch my own mother lose her home. So I made the call. I broke my lease, paid the penalty, packed my entire life into boxes, and moved back into the suburban house I grew up in. This wasn't a move to save money or for my own convenience, it was a bailout. I took over every single financial responsibility, from the mortgage payment to her car insurance and cell phone plan. I never asked her for a penny. My logic was simple and, in retrospect, tragically naive. She's my mother. You do what you have to do for family. But what started as a rescue mission had slowly morphed into a toxic, suffocating arrangement. The financial support I offered, which I saw as a gift, she had come to view as her basic due. My very existence in the house that I was single-handedly keeping afloat seemed to be a profound irritation to her. If I left a coffee cup on the counter, she would sigh dramatically about the constant mess. If I had to work late on a project in my room, I was being disruptive to her peace and quiet. She would often make comments about how lucky I was to have a roof over my head, completely ignoring the fact that the roof was legally and financially mine. And I just took it. I absorbed every passive-aggressive comment, every day of the silent treatment, every sigh. I told myself it was her depression and her sense of lost pride talking. I became an expert at tiptoeing around her moods, all in a desperate attempt to maintain a fragile peace. After her Thanksgiving declaration, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just stared at her as she calmly resumed eating her dinner, as if she hadn't just pulled the pin on a grenade and rolled it across the table. My own hunger had vanished completely. I think I'm going to be sick, I muttered, pushing my chair away. I walked to my bedroom at the end of the hall and gently closed the door. I sat on the edge of my mattress, her words echoing in my mind. I need my house back. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a final judgment. It was a polite but firm eviction. And with a sudden, chilling clarity, I got up and started to pack. My movements weren't fueled by anger, but by a cold, quiet resolve. I folded my sweaters with robotic precision. I stacked my design manuals in cardboard boxes I found in the closet. I carefully wrapped my dual monitors in a thick comforter. I had no plan, no idea where I would sleep, but I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that I could not spend another night under that roof. In the hours I spent methodically dismantling my life, she never once knocked on my door. There was no inquiry, no concern, no second thoughts. It was as if a switch had been flipped in her mind, and I had simply ceased to exist for her. The next morning, the house was unnervingly silent, the only sound the faint, rhythmic wheeze of her snoring from her bedroom. In the pre-dawn chill of the late November morning, I made 5 trips to my car, loading it with everything I owned. I took one last look at the dining room. The remnants of the feast I had poured my heart into sat on the table, a sad monument to my own foolishness. Then I walked out the front door, pulled it closed, and listened. It didn't slam. It made a quiet final click, a sound that marked the end of an entire chapter of my life. For a few days, I held on to a ridiculous shred of hope that she would call, that the reality of what she had done would hit her, and she would reach out, horrified. But my phone remained silent. The woman whose life I had been bankrolling for 4 years didn't even bother to send a text to see if I was safe or warm or had a place to sleep. I ended up at the apartment of my best friend David. He opened his door at 6 in the morning to find me standing on his welcome mat, hollow-eyed, with my overflowing car parked at the curb. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just pulled me into a hug, guided me inside, and put on a pot of coffee. The immediate, unquestioning kindness from him was such a stark contrast to the cold dismissal from my own mother that it finally shattered my composure. I crumpled onto his couch and wept, a raw, painful sobbing that I hadn't allowed myself to feel until that moment. After a few frantic days of searching online, I found a small studio apartment I could afford. It was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building with no elevator. It was just one room, with a tiny kitchen alcove and a bathroom so small my knees almost touched the wall when I sat on the toilet. But when the building manager handed me the keys and I stood alone in that empty, sun-drenched space, I felt a sense of profound and overwhelming peace. This was mine, all mine. No one could kick me out. No one could make me feel like a guest in my own home. About a week after I moved, I got a text from my sister, Jessica. "You need to call me now. Mom is telling everyone that you've had a complete breakdown." A cold sickness spread through my stomach as I dialed her number. What she told me was even worse than I could have imagined. My mother had launched a full-scale public relations campaign against me. She was calling our aunts, uncles, cousins, and all of her friends, feeding them a story in which I had a violent, unhinged meltdown at the Thanksgiving table. She claimed I had screamed horrible things at her, thrown my plate against the wall, and then stormed out in a selfish, dramatic fit, abandoning her without a word. In her version of events, she was the long-suffering victim, and I was the ungrateful, mentally unstable monster. And the most nauseating part was that it was working. Our Aunt Carol had apparently called my mother in tears, offering to organize a meal train for the poor, abandoned woman. My own uncle, a man who had always sent me funny birthday cards, had quietly removed me from his friends list on social media. My cousin Megan had kicked me out of the family group chat. I was being systematically erased from my own family based on a complete work of fiction my mother had spun to avoid taking responsibility for her own cruelty. Listening to my sister, something inside me finally broke. For years, I had been the family peacemaker. I had swallowed my own feelings, I had made excuses for her behavior, and I had protected her reputation, all for the sake of a peace that was never real. I was done. She wanted to burn my name to the ground. I wasn't going to just stand there and watch. My first instinct was to fire off a furious all-caps message to the entire family, detailing every lie, but I knew that would only feed her narrative of me being volatile. So I chose a different path, the path of cold, hard, documented proof. I sat down at the wobbly card table I was using as a desk and composed a post for my social media page. I wrote it calmly and factually. I laid out the timeline of events without any emotional language. I stated clearly that I had been paying 100% of all household expenses for the past 4 years. I described the dinner I'd made, and I quoted my mother's exact words. And then at the bottom, I attached 2 documents: a redacted screenshot from my online banking portal showing the last mortgage payment coming out of my account, and a PDF of the most recent county property tax bill, which was addressed to me at that house. I let the facts speak for themselves. Then I hit share, powered off my phone, and prepared for the inevitable explosion. I spent that day pacing the floor of my tiny studio, my heart thudding with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. I was sure I had just made everything 1,000 times worse. When I finally found the courage to turn my phone back on that night, it lit up like a Christmas tree, buzzing and chiming with an avalanche of notifications. The first message I read was from my Aunt Evelyn, my mother's older, no-nonsense sister. "Sarah, I am so sorry," it read. "I just saw your post. Your mother has always had a flair for rewriting history to make herself the hero, and we have all enabled her for too long because it was easier than fighting. I believe every word you wrote. My door is always open to you." Reading that, I felt the first crack appear in the wall of ice around my heart. Then came a text from my cousin Megan. "I am so ashamed. I'm so sorry I removed you. We all knew things were bad over there, but nobody wanted to get in the middle of it. I've already added you back." It was a painful kind of victory, the realization that my silent struggle had been noticed all along, just ignored for the sake of convenience. The true eruption, of course, came from my mother. Someone had obviously shown her my post. I woke up to a long, rambling series of texts that cycled through every classic stage of manipulation. First, guilt. "I can't believe you would air our private family business online to humiliate me after everything I've done for you." Then rage and gaslighting. "You twisted everything I said. That's not how it happened. I never told you to leave. You threw a tantrum. You're always so dramatic, always making yourself the victim." And finally, the pathetic last stand. "I am your mother." I read her words, and for the first time in my life, they had no power over me. They didn't hurt me. They didn't make me feel guilty. They just made me feel tired. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. She had built her castle on a foundation of lies, and now she had to live in the rubble. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet entered my life. It wasn't the tense silence of a fragile truce. It was the genuine quiet of solitude. I started to build a real life in my little studio. I bought a comfy armchair from a secondhand store. I got a small espresso machine and a plush rug that felt soft under my feet. I started to cook again, but just for myself, Simple, delicious meals I could eat on my couch without any fear of judgment. For the first time in years, I began to sleep through the night, free from the constant hum of anxiety that had become my background noise. A month later, my sister Jessica asked to meet me for coffee. She was still living at home and looked worn down. "It's a disaster," she said, shredding a napkin. "Mom has no idea how anything works. The internet got shut off for 2 days because she didn't know how to pay the bill online. She keeps calling Grandma asking for money, and Grandma finally cut her off." Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad understanding. "She blames you for everything, of course, but she said something strange the other night." "What?" I asked, leaning in. Jessica took a sip of her latte. She was just staring out the kitchen window, and she said very quietly, "Sarah did the right thing. She should have left a long time ago." Hearing that from the only other person who truly knew felt like a release valve opening inside my chest. It was the one piece of validation I never knew I so desperately needed. Jessica told me she was saving up to get her own place, and I told her the second she was ready, I'd be there with my car to help her pack. A few days after that, there was a knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and my stomach dropped. It was my mother, holding a cheap-looking bakery cake in a flimsy plastic container. She had a strained, practiced smile on her face. I opened the door but stood firmly in the doorway, blocking her entrance. I stepped into the hallway to face her. "What do you want?" I asked. She launched into a rehearsed speech about how she missed me, how empty the house was, how it was all a big misunderstanding and we should just agree to let it all go and start over. I listened patiently until she was finished. When the silence hung between us, I asked the only question that mattered. "Are you here to apologize?" Her smile faltered. Her eyes flickered away from mine. "Well," she stammered, "I think we both said things we shouldn't have. It takes two to have a disagreement." And that was it. In that single blame-deflecting sentence, I knew with absolute clarity that she would never change, that she was incapable of genuine remorse. I looked at the woman who had given me life and then tried to tear it down, and I felt nothing but a deep and quiet finality. "I wish you the best, Mom," I said, my voice soft but steady. Then I turned, stepped back inside my apartment and closed the door. I didn't yell, I didn't slam it, I just closed it. I wasn't angry anymore, I was free. It's been almost a year. My tiny studio is now a home, filled with plants, art, and the comforting quiet of my own life. It feels more real than that big house ever did. My sister Jessica moved in with a roommate a few months ago, and she's a different person, full of light and laughter. We see each other all the time, finally building the relationship that was impossible under our mother's roof. My social media post is still online. I never took it down. It's not an act of revenge. It's my permanent record of the truth. My mother will always see it as a betrayal. But the real betrayal wasn't a Facebook post. It was an eviction notice served over a Thanksgiving feast. It was years of taking without giving, of demanding without gratitude. I spent so long sacrificing my own well-being on the altar of her comfort. Now, I'm finally living for myself. There are no conditions, no guilt, and no more walking on eggshells. There is only peace. And I've learned that peace is the most valuable thing you can ever truly own.